Take my lips and speak with them. Take our minds and think with them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for all your people. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's an audacious task, I think, to preach after the rector has just left her 12-year tenure and be the first one. Give it to the seminarian, I guess. Anyway, let's move on, beyond that. Our world today is full of scarcity. We're polarized by fear that something will not be enough. Land, oil, food, water, the one truth. We're fighting and killing. We're so afraid we don't have enough. So imagine being invited to buy and eat when you have no money. This is a theology of abundance, not scarcity. God promises an everlasting covenant. God's love to hear and eat what is good. A rich feast. Christ Church's BHAG, that big, hairy, audacious goal, being a gateway for the community. That's envisioning the abundance and knowing it can be shared with abandon. Through the prophet Isaiah, God invites us to come to the water, the abundance of goodness, and never fear that there is not enough. There will be enough. Our human difficulty, though, is in knowing what is enough. And it's not hoarding or taking. Our big, hairy, audacious goal, that BHAG, is a vision of sharing, being a beacon of hope and love, calling all who thirst to come to the water, giving to the world with abandon as God gives. In her book, Jesus Freak, Feeding, Healing, Raising from the Dead, Sarah Miles says, the Spirit of God isn't limited by tribe or ancestors or behavior. It's poured out for everyone. For everyone. But we're constantly competing to get our share. She says, if we believe that love is scarce and are afraid to give it away, we'll never be truly fed. The truth is, she says, God gives us everything we have. And whenever we are willing to receive that blessing and pass it on, we live in the kingdom of abundance. He gave the food to the disciples, who gave it to the crowds, and they all ate as much as they wanted. When I'm at the bank and trying to pay my loan, how do these connect? A relative whose truck was about to be repossessed called to ask for help. But we've got problems of our own. We said to each other, no. Then we said, how can we not? We're often being asked to help family, friends, strangers, the world's crises, and we're often not in a place where helping comes easily. In the gospel reading today, Jesus just wanted to get away from everybody who was asking him for time, attention, miracles. We hear from Matthew, when Jesus heard this, But we don't get the beginning of the story in our lectionary cycle. When Jesus heard this, refers to the fact that Jesus has just learned of the death of John the Baptist, a pretty important person in Jesus' life, his cousin, among other things. Jesus was exhausted from the teaching, the healing, and the travels. He and the disciples were looking for a little R&R, and he gets this horrible news. So he gets in a boat to go off alone. But the people follow, walking around the lake, and they're there when Jesus arrives. They want more teaching and healing. Jesus has compassion for them. He heals the sick, but it's a deserted place out in the middle of nowhere. No food, no lodging. And it's late. The tired and overworked disciples recommend sending everyone home. Jesus says the demanding, hungry crowds don't need to leave. And Jesus says to the disciples, "You give them something to eat." Whoa! They have nothing. Only 5 loaves and 2 fish. A normal day's ration was 1.5 loaves per person. So this is about enough for 2 people for a day. The fish, we're talking little perch-sized fish, not salmon or swordfish. And when either pickled or smoked, it was considered a delicacy in addition to the bread. This is not enough for these crowds. Scarcity. Fear. It's the fear the disciples have. It's like our fear that we can't meet the needs of the people who need our help, our friendship, our love. So this demand by Jesus, "You feed them," is not what we would expect from the kind, loving, compassionate Jesus. He gives them an impossible task. Jesus takes what the disciples have, gives thanks to God, blesses it, and breaks it. Yes, this alludes to the Last Supper, our Eucharist, our weekly feast of thanksgiving. He broke the bread and gave it to them to distribute. And give they did. Jesus gives us a seemingly impossible task. We have so much that doesn't cost us anything to give. Smiles, compliments, a little help, opening a door, just plain kindness. Love. But yet our culture of scarcity makes us afraid to give abundantly of those things that don't really cost us anything. So what are we going to do? Our rector has moved on. What's our vision of abundance? How are we going to respond today? How will you? How will I? Work with what you got. At the feeding of the 5,000, and most likely it was more, that was only counting the men in this story, Jesus instructed them to pick up the leftovers. Leftovers from 5 loaves? Remember, that's ration for about 2 people for a day, and 2 fish, which was only an accompaniment to the bread. Leftovers. 12 baskets. The abundance, not scarcity. In my case, we thought we couldn't afford it, but we gave thanks, broke our bread, and there was enough. A very good friend of mine grew up in the Depression. His mother always had food for the people who came to the back door. Every night. Abundance. Giving. I'm not saying we should give to our detriment. I am suggesting that we have abundance and we don't realize it. So, what is the abundance Christ Church has? How does this connect to our BHAG, our big, hairy, audacious goal? What's your abundance? What will you do when Jesus says, you give them something to eat? Imagine how you might respond. What visions of God's abundance do you see? Amen.